At first glance, these might not look like much, but in all honesty, they are probably my favorite bits of terrain I've built in like several months. Hey guys, welcome back to Black Magic Craft. I absolutely love these things. Why? Well, I think they are the perfect balance of effort versus reward. They were super simple to put together, and in the end, I think they look dope as hell. I'm aware that as a terrain builder, I often make a lot of decisions that sacrifice how good or how durable something is or how nice it looks in order to achieve techniques that are faster, easier, and more approachable. And this is especially true when I'm building stuff for videos. So it's really nice when I can still have things that are approachable and easy to do without making those sacrifices. And these are the perfect example of that working. I'm also really happy with the paint job on these. Oftentimes my paint jobs are just kind of good enough to get the job done. They're okay, but they're rarely something that I'm proud of, and often they're something that I'm a little bit nervous to put on the internet for hundreds of thousands of people. But you know what? The paint job on these, it looks good. I'm happy with it. I'm proud of it. And I leaned on my airbrush to do it because I'm learning that that airbrush allows me a lot of freedom to do more creative and dynamic paint jobs with very little skill. But of course, you wouldn't have to do that. I've made like 150 build videos where I painted things with craft paint and a brush, and you could apply those same techniques here if you don't want to go the airbrush route. While the final product looks like the skulls are made of plaster or solid stone or something, in reality, they're just the cheapest hollow Halloween skulls you can get. I bought a bag of like a dozen of these for maybe $2 a few years ago, and they come in super handy all the time. I really just needed the face portion, and thankfully the plastic is so soft and thin that it's about as easy as it gets to cut with an X-Acto knife. All I had to do was grab a chunk of XPS foam and cut some stone pillars. I quickly decided that I didn't want the foam carving to look, well, you know, like the way it always looks when you carve rock from foam. It has a really recognizable look. I wanted something that had a bit more of a refined texture. So I turned to another method. Instead of cutting and carving, I just scraped the blade across the foam. This creates a really nice layered look. It's really not hard to do. All you have to be mindful of is creating lines in interesting directions and getting them to line up from side to side. I realized I could actually get both of my stones out of just this one first piece, so I cut it in half instead of creating a second one. I thought they would look better if they were lower and each angled in a bit of a different way. Attaching the skulls was a simple matter of hot gluing them in place. The only real trick here is making sure the skulls are as flat as possible. If they're projecting a bunch, they could look kind of goofy. You want to imply that they were carved out of the stone. And if they're sticking way out, well, it's gonna look like they're mounted to the stone rather than being part of it. I prepared some MDF bases and made some final adjustments to the carving before attaching them. In order to really sell the look, I cut off a big chunk of one of them, including some of the skull. I really wanted to make these look like they were carved from one chunk of stone, and this would really help with that. The secret to making the two pieces unified was modeling paste. You could use a variety of things for this: epoxy putties, plasters, hot glue, whatever. But I think modeling paste is the easiest to work with in this application. You can apply it pretty thin, and it was really easy to sculpt in a way that mimicked the texture on the foam. An important thing to notice is that I applied the paste to most of the smooth surfaces of the skulls. I didn't just want to hide the seams. I really wanted to continue that texture across and over as much of the skulls as possible. This is a big reason that the final product actually looked kind of believable. I decided to use modeling paste to cover the bases as well, and I wouldn't actually say this is normally the best choice, but I'm really low on Sculptamold, which would be my go-to here, and my tub of modeling paste was starting to get a bit hard and dried out on the top layer, so I figured why not just use it up here. It was a good way to get rid of some of that material that was starting to go bad. And while that paste was still uncured, I added some chunks of foam as well as some gravel to make a bit of rubble and debris from the crumbling stone pillars. And instead of coating the foam in Mod Podge to harden it like I normally do, I decided to apply Vallejo ground texture to the whole piece. My hope was that it would make the foam really hard while also adding a little bit more texture and cohesiveness to the skulls and the stone. I was also able to use it to add a more dynamic and natural texture to the bases. The stuff dries really fast, so I could quickly move on to painting. And I gotta say, I'm absolutely in love with what this coating accomplished. It really did everything I wanted. I'm super impressed with how much it hardened the foam. Now, obviously with the texture, it's got like some fine sand in it. It's not gonna work on all projects, but for stone, fan-friggin-tastic. Again, I gotta wax poetic about airbrush painting here. I've painted hundreds of things with craft paint and brushes, and I have a ton of videos showing me do that. There's nothing wrong with those methods. You can totally get acceptable results that way. But with a quick zenithal prime and a few coats of inks, I just can't get over how good it looks with so little skill required. The airbrush was really the magic ingredient for me as a painter. I've never been willing to put in the time required to get really good at brush painting. And using the airbrush kind of lets me skip that effort and get something that looks pretty good without all that practice and effort. And honestly, I just really wish I had started using this tool sooner. I used to kind of dislike the painting portion of building, but doing this method has really made it become my favorite part of the whole process. I just find it so much easier to get a refined look. Because it's quick, I feel more comfortable exploring more adventurous color schemes. On these, if I was painting by brush, I'd probably stick to tans and grays. But here, I felt liberated to experiment with mossy greens, browns, and even a bit of red, which I think gives the piece a far more realistic stone color. And when it came to dry brushing on some tan to highlight the edges, I was actually kind of nervous to overdo it because I was so happy with where these were at, and I sometimes put on too much paint when dry brushing. I think this was the most cautious dry brushing I've ever done. And I was rewarded for being patient and using almost no paint. The effect is subtle, but any more I think would have ruined the pieces. Well, not ruin them, it's just paint. I could have fixed it, but any more paint on the dry brush wouldn't have looked as good. And I actually think I could have just left the bases as is. That Vallejo ground texture painted up looked just fine, and it would be a really nice durable base option. But I'd be remiss if I didn't add some sort of flocking. And I have this Woodland SCENICS foliage that is meant for making trees. I bought it years ago to make bushes. And rather than just being ground up texture or foam or whatever, it's sort of made into a sheet. It's kind of like a little net. So it's great for creating plant life that's growing up vertical surfaces. For the rest, I just used a mixture of really fine turf and tea bag fillings. The last step was just to blast it with a bit more brown ink to tone down the colors of the flocking and the tea. Like I said at the start, these little pieces may not look like much, but they are, in my opinion, the best thing I've made in a long time. They might be small, they might not be complicated, but they're incredibly effective. I think they look more professional than a lot of the things I make, and they're really durable at the same time. That's a hard thing to achieve. Often if you want something to look more realistic, you sacrifice durability. The more detailed, the more fragile, especially when it comes to things like flocking. But these things will hold up. You could totally just throw them in a bin and transport them no problem. And they look good. If I were to create a big table's worth of scatter terrain in one theme, I think I'd be going with a lot of the techniques that I tried out on these. So what do you guys think? Let me know in the comment section below. If you like this video, hit that like button or the dislike button, thumbs up, thumbs down, it doesn't matter. Both help the video and help the channel in the exact same way. If you want to pick up any tools or supplies for your hobby needs, and you're not sure what to get or where to get it, check out blackmagiccraft.ca. I've curated an extensive essential equipment page where I link to all of the stuff that I use and explain it, why I use it, what it is, and that way you can understand what the heck you're shopping for, especially if you're just starting out. And if you really enjoy these videos that I make each and every week and you want to help me keep making them, the best way you can do that is by supporting the channel on Patreon. It's because of Patreon that I have the resources to make a weekly crafting video. It's pretty ridiculous to think that I can actually spend my full-time efforts doing this, and one of the reasons, the main reason, is because of the support of people on Patreon. And if you join up, $1 a month, you get access to the Discord server that's full of awesome crafters. And if you join at the fellowship level, you get access to the private Facebook group that is a really good resource full of other people who are interested in this hobby. If you have a question or you're having a hard time with something, you can post it there and people are gonna help you out really fast. It's also a place where you can directly tag me for help. And as a nice little bonus, Patreon supporters get to see these videos a few days early. That's how you get those comments that are older than the video. It's always funny, people are confused. How did this video just get published an hour ago, but there's a comment from 3 days ago? That's why, because a lot of folks are watching these like 2 days early. That's it for this week, guys. Cheers. I'll see you again next week.